So welcome back. In our last segment, we created a new scenario, the suggestion prompt completion for Animal Superhero. If you recall, we ran it here directly here in Postman. Um, we talked a little bit also about the prep work step mode and the work step mode sticky. I wanted to go in a little more detail about that right now. That code for those types of things, as mentioned, the infrastructure is here. It actually is for the automation workflow. It runs for every request that runs down here in the scenario. This runs before it. Check into the Postman documents to get an idea of how that's set up in Postman, but it's a very powerful feature in Postman. The same applies here in tests. All of these are collapsible as you go through, and you can see basically all the different modes that are supported: prep, run, skip in the case of error, and of course test, which is just a cursory between prep and run. Prep, run, test is the typical phase. And the sticky basically gives you the ability to stay in one of the modes, either in prep or run. It's useful when you're setting up a new, where there's, for instance, a complex payload you're trying to put together. It might make sense to put it in preppy, in sticky prep mode, and that's how that's done. And then basically you can just keep entering new configuration parameters at will and keep hitting send. Normally though, as mentioned, the way that works is it's going to modulate between prep and run. And so if you are in the test phase, first prep, then run, and it's good here, hit OpenAI. We got Super Joe, a little bit different this time, the amazing macro pod, which is kind of interesting. But then again, send, you're back to hitting the local server in prep mode, and then again in run. And the same applies here for sticky run. You can also do when it's in run mode, true, and it'll stay in that service call. But enough on that for now. We want to move on to triggers, which is also, as I've mentioned, also in the documentation, is a powerful feature of RESTNEST. It gives us the abilities to duplicate and even improve on the Postman collection runner automation, which here recently has also come under some fires as a result of changes that were made at Postman to count the number of collection runs. And depending upon the subscription level at Postman, you only have a certain number available per month. So it's cool that RESTNEST gives you the ability then over triggers then to run those. And let's go ahead and do that here real quick. For every time you enter a new scenario, automatically when it gets augmented before it gets uploaded back into the Postman workspace here, it creates for every one of the scenarios that's available a shortcut. This would be the suggestion prompts that we took a look at, and we simply hit send. Down here, we can, with command follow, go to that report. It was really quick. You can actually see how that ran here in console and go back, or you can look in all of the requests by expanding all of the folders and expanding all the requests. And you see down here, we get a similar output that we got in Postman. So it's a lot like the collection runner, except I think from the HTML, which is, there's lots of reporters available for Newman. This is the standard HTML reporter. It does a really good job. Integrated in RESTNEST, obviously, to the console. So that's an important part of it. So that's how triggers are run. Obviously, triggers themselves are just requests, so you can have a collection of triggers, which would constitute a scenario suite where you can run one scenario after the other in a pipeline or in Newman for that matter. So to speed things up a little bit, we're going to go ahead and use our previous completions to get the chat completions here. It's instead of doing that all manually, let's go ahead and just duplicate this folder, copy and paste that up here to the scenarios. So there we have our chat completions, all of that's up there, and we can go ahead and then rename that. We need to instead do run that'll take a moment. So that's complete. As we can see now, this one is gone. Let's go ahead and clear everything out. And let's move over here to our triggers. And here now we see for all of those that we just added, it gets added when we do that re-augmentation. The next is we want to trigger this again. This one is a fairly complex one. And let's see how that goes. So we can actually follow that here in runtime, exactly how it's moving through the requests. It's going to every 10 seconds, it's going to update this console. So you do get a sense of how the requests are moving in the background. Obviously, if you go to your terminal, you'll see the same type of output, but you won't see a console here. So this is a really helpful element to get an idea of what's really running in the background, um, as we can see. So once it finally completes this test, and I believe this whole thing runs in a minute, what it's doing is it's asking based on entity types of customer, as well as let's just go ahead and open it up here. For customer order and order state, it says, go ahead and give me a JSON for that, a JSON schema. And then it says, create me an open API from that schema. And then it says, create test data for me from that prompt. So it's a fairly complex scenario that goes through and does all of these. It's also fairly expensive from OpenAI perspective, because for each one of these, it's building on this complex prompt. And I won't go into the details of that here for lack of time, but it's something you can dig into and get a sense of how the response from a previous request can be used to transform into the request for the next work step. And that's how you build complex scenarios. And this seems to still be running. Oh, it's completed here. And there we are, done. So again, you can come back over here. You can expand all of the folders to see exactly what was done. For each one of these is a prep and a run phase. So there you have it. Instead of the collection runner, we can easily trigger our scenarios, watch their console output, and see the final nifty HTML report simply with a click on the trigger response link. Again, a reminder, anytime you make changes to the folders as have been made here in the chat completions, or anytime you rename, always be sure to run async collections so that the scenario trigger file are updated down here in the folder. Finally, I want to show that the triggers that we see that we can launch here manually can also be, obviously, as mentioned, launched in local as well as in pipelines through these folders here. I've already duplicated one of them. That's basically how it's done. You simply duplicate and paste like you do with the work step, any of those that you want to run there. And I'm going to show you a simple script right here to do this locally, but ultimately for a pipeline, it's the same thing. You simply copy it in there. You'd create a PR, you would merge that. And on the next run, next cron run, that particular scenario would run as well. It's as simple as that. So let me show you real quick how that is set up. Basically, there is in the package JSON, as one would expect, a run scenario suite example. This basically points to that folder ID. We're going to go grab them because it always has to, whenever it's augmented, the ID can change. So you need to go grab that, but it's in the prod environment using the developer. So let's switch back to that real quick and take a look and make sure that we have the right folder. You do that here. Yeah, this is the folder that we want to run. So we're just going to grab that and we're going to put that here in this folder ID. You can get rid of the UUID in front, and then we can simply, let's go ahead and kill our server and then run that example. It runs that here as you see these triggers up on top. You can see they were all run async. This particular one is set up to have multiple iterations. You'll notice there's a couple of other parameters here that you can use, but iterations is very convenient. Um, the same as it is obviously in Postman, you also have the links directly here. So if you want to get to those HTML reports, you simply can command click into those. Of course, when the server is running, so let's turn the server on, and then we can go back and click on one of those reports. And there you can actually see the report itself, see what it ran. As we did before, expand the folders and the requests accordingly. And that's basically it. We've covered all of the main points that RESTNest offers. Obviously, once we've finished with the scenario that we're working on, we would do a merge changes to see which changes have been made. I have in the interim, as you can see, all of these changes are available to be made, and you can then, when you're ready, create a pull request and add the title, the description, and the reviewer. Have someone approve that, and you can merge it, and then it'll be on main. And like we said, those triggers that we just set up would be then running in the next pipeline. So that's all for now. Happy rest nesting.